Hello, and welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Gary, and today we're going to review and discuss Death Machine, which came out in 1994, written and directed by Stephen Norrington.
What's the synopsis, Gary?
Well, the story follows Hayden Cale, played by Ellie Pouget, a top executive at the Chank organization, which has been experimenting with the ultimate fighting machine, which is part human, part machine. Jack Dante, played by Brad Dourif, is soon fired for his experiments and unleashes the ultimate killing machine, the War Beast, to kill everyone that gets in his way. It's time to suit up and fight back as man's deadliest invention is about to show its mettle. The future has teeth.
Let's go.
Unlike this film. Apparently people love this film. Now, full disclosure, no, not me. I would like to be honest from the open. I mean, this film just left me feeling flat, at the very best. I mean, there's amazing sequences, like the opening isn't amazing. I mean, it's a strange. I thought it was any which way but through, because honestly it was like a highway. The way that was slow pan shots, I was like, oh, it's going to be some sort of gentle introduction to a character. Nope, it's just you open straight into a kind of post battle, so you don't even get to see the fights. Things are on fire that don't make any sense, and I grumble about this endlessly because it takes me out. Because again, you open a pan shot from a highway into this kind of roadside diner.
I thought the cinematography here was really good. I thought the set dressing was okay.
Probably for a different film.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem. This film doesn't have consistency. It changes throughout. The set designs are all odd. When you finally see the battle suits they're wearing, they look a bit silly. And maybe that's just an aesthetic of the age. But, you look at the 90s and there were other films that are timeless for their set design. I just don't feel the art concept was great from the outset here. And again, I'm going to mention it before I mentioned it before this, Demolition Man. Similar sort of era. The vision was there, though. The world building.
So was the budget.
Perhaps. But this doesn't have the tiniest budget. And, I mean, a lot of the set stuff they built was clearly built from scratch. They still had a ton of different sets they used, a ton of different mechanical monsters they used. I just don't know. I just feel like, this is a much... I don't know, the vision wasn't there. That's the issue. I think there's a lack of vision. And again, this director goes on to do things like Blade, and I argue that has vision.
I mean, this was his first movie, and he said he was never fully, truly happy with the final edit of this movie. And there are 4 different cuts of this movie, including a director's cut, to which, the version we've just watched and are reviewing today is the extended version. It's the 2-hour cut of the movie. And I do believe, the director's cut would have removed a bunch of things. This film was also banned in many countries for its use of excessive violence and for the portrayal of Brad Dourif's psychotic, rapist lunatic. It definitely offended a lot of countries. I'm just like, you cannot release that film here.
Yeah, people could seem to... I mean, maybe sensibilities have changed, or maybe it was just their way of trying to get the film a bit more hype. Because again, I would say this, a lot of films will hype up their violence and make it more dramatic. But when they get banned, that makes it more popular in the countries that are more into... the Western countries that are more into these...
video nasties.
Yeah, the video nasties, yeah. But it wasn't that bad. No. I mean, that's the thing. We're not going to recommend it for that, which is kind of like what people love. I mean, there's some bits of goriness where you see, but it's from after the kill, you see a shot of a body. Again, you don't see the kill. And again, when you enter the first dining sequence it's a highway in America, down to a diner. You walk through the police are terrified, surrounding the building. And then these armoured battlesuit kind of dudes show up and they don't do anything.
No, they just,
they walk through the wreckage.
They just see all the corpses sat in their chairs.
All shot in the head.
Yeah.
As if they're all shot simultaneously.
And it looks like someone who's in a knockoff RoboCop suit is just doing some renovating.
Yeah, with some really bad... I mean, it's cyberpunk, but it's...
Yeah.
It's cliche cyberpunk in the clichéest way. Because everything just looks so knockoff. And again, the suits aren't terrible looking. It's just the design. Again, again, it's not necessarily a budget issue. They seem to have the set design was there when you get we get to a corporate headquarters shortly after this.
Yeah,
scene, because this scene leads. You meet one of the executives is leading this team that go into the diner to recover their man robot
Right.
who's gone off the deep end, and you kind of get the corporate CEO going, don't worry, he wears himself out, and it's just like the murdering machine's gone bananas and is punching the wall, and then turns to them, screams, and then falls over. And I'm like, yeah, that's a threat to the free world.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of a comedic. It is a misdirection again.
Yeah,
because that
yeah.
isn't. Though it does
Those
come
are
up,
not the death
no,
machines.
It does come up later, but it's not
Yeah.
as a threat to the narrative.
But there was a small nod there. When you do see him fall over, you can just about make out the words Cameron written on the side of the unit. And I was like, well, that's clearly a callback to James Cameron, a Terminator kind of thing. And this film doesn't hold back on its references.
Oh, wait a minute. I got something to say. I'll be back.
Brad Dourif's character, Jack Dante, is a play on Joe Dante. We also get introduced to the head of the company, played by Richard Brake, who's playing Scott Ridley, not Ridley Scott. And the executive that we first saw that revealed his mask, the big guy, Porkins, from Star Wars, is called John Carpenter.
John.
I've explained this to Dante over and over.
John.
But you know how excitable he gets.
John.
What? Shut the fuck up.
And it doesn't end there either. Later on, we get introduced to Sam Raimi and his two flunkies, Wayland and Yutani.
I know it is sort of a really odd fan service because they're trying to play honour to all the greats, but the problem is this film doesn't really live up to
It doesn't live up to any of that, does it?
No, and I mean that's the real problem because from here on out you end up back at the kind of headquarters of the corporation. It turns out that these three men and that robot came from, and there's a woman trying to get into work that day, a new executive, which is our main character.
There's lots of protesters. There's the news broadcast explaining how the Chank organization is responsible for child death and bizarre experiments and conspiracies.
People are screaming and holding up pictures. I mean, Ellie Pouget is the main character, and she plays Hayden Cale, which I don't think is the only character.
Yeah,
it might not be referencing a director, though. Correct us in the comments if we're wrong, because I couldn't see. I mean, I didn't dig super deep.
Wasn't as obvious as the others.
So she's trying to get into work, and she's clearly a bit traumatized by everything that's going on. And so you finally get to the board meeting where you meet almost everybody. That's going to carry us through the rest of the film, bar three characters that pop up later and the villain of the piece. And it's the executive board of this corporation, and they are cross because there's been a leak, and then it turns out Ellie, our main character, did the leak, and she's like, no, I'm sick and tired of all this crap. And then Hawkins tries to, it's like, no, we've shut that program down, don't worry, it's all getting shut down, we're not doing any more human cyborg testing. And then there's an argument, and it doesn't really matter.
I want every suspect project shut down. I want all the details on my desk tonight, and I want Dante fired right now.
Because all the characters are just... I mean, this is the problem with this film. Again, the set design is okay. I mean, it doesn't quite... I mean... That's the problem. None of it really jumps out. It looks like a really bland office for a lot of it.
It's like lots of very dim blue neon lighting in there as well. It's kind of capturing the James Cameron feel or the Blade Runner kind of visual.
Yeah, they're trying to do light coming through these orange light coming through windows.
Yeah, it's supposed to be set in the near future, but 1994 near future.
Well, and again, they don't really do. I mean, I don't mind that they don't do outside shots because they don't want to do miniature shots.
Well, almost the rest of the entire film takes place in this office now. This it's very
mega
tower.
Assault on. No, that wasn't an assault on precinct. It's more like the raid to a comedic sense.
Sure.
A bad knockoff raid, which didn't even happen. It was made after, I know, but it's kind of all trapped in this one building. You're then fighting through the floors of the building to survive and escape. And there's things in the cellar they kind of shouldn't let out. They get let out, and then they lock them up, and then they get out again. And it's just like, oh, for God's sake.
Well, that's the thing that really gets Hayden Cale really upset, is that the person responsible for making these death machines isn't even bothered to come up to the board meeting, which gets her irate.
And how did Jack Dante get on a board? I mean, the character played by Dourif is a total nut job.
Absolutely.
And this is umbrella level of corporate incompetence.
Yes.
It's just like, well, we hired the guy because he's a genius. What does he make, though? Does it make, like, really good cars? Or is he helping make the new toaster? No, boss. He makes an army of death robots. It's like, can we control them? Sometimes. It's just like, this sounds like Umbrella's strategy of just making zombies
Right.
and bioweapons and not being able to control them.
It's the fact that their former boss of this company also died mysteriously
In a shark attack.
in a shark attack in
skyscraper.
a skyscraper.
He couldn't be building anything down there.
Nicholson did what you're doing.
You read the autopsy.
Shark attack.
In this fucking building?
So, again, there's almost this dark comedy edge to it. And it's farce. It's bordering on farce, but it's not farce, and that's the problem. And if you're embrace farcical horror, we all love a bit of a laugh.
Sure.
Or you make such a bad film that it's that laughable. This film doesn't even reach that. I mean, it's passable, unfortunately, most of the time. And because none of it ties together effectively through editing, script writing, like we said, the actors aren't that bad. None of them offended me.
Yeah.
Dourif hams it up a bit when we finally encounter him, which is shortly after this board meeting.
Just before we leave the board meeting, though, I just want a small bit of trivia for you. It's Rachel Weisz, one of her first ever on-screen appearances at the board meeting.
One of the junior executives.
One of the junior executives. That is her name. And so Kale gets really irate, ends up having an argument with Ridley Scott, and then goes wandering off to find Joe Dante. And it's a pretty cool sequence where you've got this like industrial factory, all these people welding and working on robotics
in a skyscraper.
Exactly, it does feel weird. And then you've got all of the graffiti on the wall. She makes her way in there, and it's surrounded by toys and pornography, until we finally do get introduced to Jack Dante, who's kind of like doesn't want anything to do with her. He's just watching porn and watching cartoons, and he's just like, you know what, I'm doing what I want to do. You know, it's fine. But he also creeps her out by reeling off her bank account details, her corporate number, and her address, and so she ends up leaving, and then he turns up at her apartment while she's looking into him. And it's reeling off all of his crimes and all of the things that hasn't been held accountable for. And it pops up saying, recommended for promotion afterwards. Just like, this really is Umbrella levels of insanity.
I know. And he's a computer hacker and he controls the world.
So he's probably hacked it himself.
Yeah, but he doesn't have the corporate authority of like the executives. And it's just bizarre, the whole thing. And this is where the script, again, it's like he's being creepy. And I mean, I think you see him in an off shot just before she meets him in his basement, and he's watching porn, but it's then insinuated it might be her,
right? Because he turns up,
trying to use it as blackmail.
He turns up at her apartment with the magazine saying, "I knew you from somewhere," and of course he gets the reaction that he wanted. He gains the upper hand, but he also ends up pulling out a gun and a rubber duck, chicken.
Again, it's weird comedy. You get that later when he's captured by. We'll get to this, but a sequence where it's the comedy coat full of infinite guns, and it's just very odd.
Well, he gets off on murder, and he gets off on the fact that that he's infatuated with this woman, and when she pulls his own gun on him, he's almost orgasmic with it, and it's just. But he's also very childlike. But it's Brad Dourif, so he's going to do creepy incredibly well. Almost one of the best actors in the world at pulling this off in such a bizarre manner.
Yes.
Right. Time in a month.
And it's just again this childlike quality as he ends up grabbing the magazine in his duck and he goes running back through her giant kind of like living space, like tapping every light as he goes out. You're just like, what is this?
Yeah, I think again his character's interesting and probably the only one of the characters there are. But again, he's underdeveloped. The character doesn't get enough script writing to kind of.
He has no motivation other than wanting to see the world burn.
And her naked, maybe, I don't know. I mean, and that's not enough motivation as a serious villain. I mean. Maybe we expect more, but then in the reviews that came out around the time, a lot of people criticised the film for that very reason. It wasn't. It just didn't have the depth, and he just having a pervy, twisted little boy.
Yeah.
which I'm sure, if they justified that damaged childhood or some sort of character flaws that were created by a terrible upbringing, you could see that. But the film doesn't.
But that's not this type of film.
No. But you don't need to. Most films don't need to go into great detail with this. You drop subtle hints. You drop even less subtle hints. And you don't need to distract, especially in a 2-hour cut of a film. You could put aside 10 minutes just to help all the characters breathe a little bit.
Well, it's fine because he mostly disappears from the film for the
yeah,
most
but he's
part.
the villain for the most bit until you meet his
Well, we get
robots.
introduced to our villains for now anyway, as we see these. We get introduced to Sam Raimi and Wayland and Yutani, and they're hanging out in this truck.
Well, they're not the villains. They're
Well,
idiots.
they're kind of set up as the villains for now because they're the ones that are going to be breaking into this organization to get into the vault and take the money and blow shit up.
They're anti-war. They're anti-war protesters.
Yeah,
or
but
something.
it's not obviously apparent until halfway through because we see them smoking drugs, like they've got these elaborately kind of made joints.
It's not my thing, but I couldn't understand any of it. None of it made any sense. They're silly. They're just, and again, that was just like, it's the future. They'll do it differently. Why? What? Why?
So very 90s of them.
I know everything, and it all.
And of course, they explain. I mean, the three of them know the entire mission, but they explain it to the audience, and we get the computer-generated imagery of the map of their plan to get into the vault and how they're going to bring down this organization.
A quad matrix of Googleplectic memory coprocessors and 350 billion in master software bonds. Aru!
And they turn up and he's dressed like an ice cream man or delivery guy of some kind. He's also in Die Hard.
I know.
Yeah.
Stop talking about better films.
I'm sorry.
And again, this is not Die Hard. It's
No.
a tower, and there's no
But then
badasses.
we get the scene with Brad Dourif and Richard Brake where he's just like, I want this, how did she get into my basement level?
You gave her the key card.
You
It's
gave
like,
her the
no,
key
she
card.
stole it. And then he goes bananas and goes, you accused my girlfriend of stealing!
So he unleashes his death bot. And of course, as an audience, we get to see this camera shot, this POV flying down corridors with some computer overlays.
It's just like a cartoon game.
But it's the funny moment when it cuts back to the two of them sat in the office, and he's got his finger on the button, and it's just silence. And it's like they're just waiting, and they're waiting for a prolonged period of time as it keeps cutting back to the robot making
And he's
its way there.
sweat's dripping down his face, although it looks like it's been dripped on by a syringe
Yes.
off screen.
So what happens?
Hopefully, you die.
And again, this is the issue with the film at large. It's just that whole sequence is weird, and he's killing off a character. What the first of many? Well, not that many to be honest. Not many people die in this film outside the opening diner sequence, which kills probably more than the rest of the film. So he then gets killed off camera.
Yes.
He gets chased. The chase
Yeah.
scene's interesting, but the whole building's a bit bland again, and it's not like any of the screens that. Again, the first person CGI. Again, this film got some awards. It's nominated for a couple and won one, I think, for its practical effects. And so I guess for the 90s, the first person POV of the robot dog, which you'll see sort of, which isn't very scary or very. I mean, they had hydraulics they had to pop off to spin its head round at certain points and some other crazy stuff. And I mean, the technical team behind it clearly put a lot of effort in, but I just don't think the visual concept design understood. I think it was too clean, and this film got told off for being too bloody. And I mean, when you see the after kill shot, because there's a third secondary shot from a security footage.
Yes, yeah.
And it looks a bit gruesome, but again, it's not that clear or detailed.
Well, John Carpenter calls in Hayden Kale back into the office and shows the aftermath. And, she makes a point about firing the cleaners of the place, but he bungs in the VHS tape and he's like, here's the footage, here's what happened. It's like, oh, must have been another land shark.
Yeah, and again, it's Sharknado before Sharknado.
I mean, his corpse looks, suitably mangled, but it would
It's
have.
still a fuzzy image. It's not very clear, and you don't see the death. And again, you don't see the
Yes.
death of anybody. The robot kind of just runs up, people die, you never see him again.
Yeah, pretty much.
And it's chomp, 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 chomp. It's not that scary. I mean, that's the
No.
biggest issue. I mean,
Well,
the
I mean-
monster of the week in this particular one is a giant cybernetic dog. It's not an actual dog, it's just a robot because humans go crazy. So the dog is on a kill switch that he holds down, it goes killy, killy, killy until
until he releases the button again. But apparently the robot can also sense your fear, and so like the more frightened you are, the easier it is for it to locate you
He's
wherever
tracking
you
through
are.
heartbeat monitors, or maybe again they never really reference it properly, but they've all got trackers implanted in their wrists.
Yeah, well
You
well,
might
she
be
does,
tracked.
yeah.
Yeah, no, all the CEOs have them.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
common
Well, it's
already.
only her and John left.
Well, no, the rest are out. On,
Yeah, yeah, but-
thankfully, are not in the building.
Yeah, but they also not members of the facility, so they don't have those trackers.
The board do. The rest of the board.
Yeah, but it's
would.
only her and John Carpenter left
Yes,
in the building.
Yeah, yeah.
So
No, sorry, left.
Yeah.
You made it sound like they're dead. No, a lot of the... Here's the fun bit, like, it's a 10 to 15, including Rachel Weisz. None of these board members come back.
No, they're all
You
gone
end up
now.
with 4 board members, and you eventually get down to 1 board member.
yeah. Well, the terrorists, you know, the stoners, they turn up into the building and they end up
They
taking.
explicitly want to get into the 1 vault that they just sealed.
Yeah.
Because the main character's finally dealt with Dante to some extent.
Yeah,
She's like,
she's fired him.
Yeah, she's cut his access to the system, fired him on the computer, and sealed his vault.
Yes.
Which allows the monster no longer to get out. Because
Yeah.
the vaults are like super bulletproof tombs, essentially.
Right.
And why wouldn't you, I guess? I mean,
Yeah, so the job's done. But
Yeah.
then until these guys come in and they want to get into the vault so that they can blow it up and get the money, we assume. And of course we have that sequence you mentioned earlier where they end up stripping them down of all their weapons. And you get that prolonged sequence of them disarming Jack Dante, where they're pulling out all these different guns, and then they're pulling out the knives,
He's
and
a
then they're
First
pulling out the
Amendment
rubber
CEO,
chicken.
You know, he's an executive who believes in the First Amendment because he's carrying. It's a comedic amount of guns.
Yes.
It doesn't make any sense, and none of it makes any sense. And his character development doesn't make any sense. And he,
Well, he decides now to work with these guys because, you know, he's been fired, and so he's like, well, if you want to get into the vault, I can show you a quicker and easier way to get in there. And he lures them all the way down in there until I think it's Wayland ends up being the first one to get pinned down by the death machine, and he ends up holding up a giant tank, which then explodes when the robot bites into it, and so we lose Wayland.
yeah, he
And
dies.
Sam Raimi ends up running back up to the others, and there's a big argument sequence, and that's when...
Raimi kind of does an almost cheesy no,
Right.
because his friend's dead, and it's like, we didn't know you, they didn't know us, we
but-
didn't care, none of this matters to us.
But then John Carpenter pulls out a gun and then takes the rest of them hostage, and we get another comedy sequence where he's marching them like canaries in front of him down one corridor, and then the camera lingers there. And then we see them all walking back the same way they just come to the other direction. It's just like, oh, jeez.
Yeah, the set wasn't huge, I guess, but
It's just all these comedy beats, and I'm like, tonally, what does this film want to be? Because right now I'm finding it more humorous than anything else, because the violence and the kills have been so disappointing. Like, the performances are so over the top, hammy, corny, and cringeworthy. I'm just like, I can't take this film seriously anymore, you know. And then we get the elevator sequence where John is, you know, he's rubbing up next to Kale, like, well, you know, I hope this doesn't affect our professional working relationship. So she punches him right in the face, and then finally the death bot, the kill machine, turns up in the elevator, and this is probably the best action scene in the film, where, you know, we get the set being torn apart, the robot coming through, we get our first real good glance at its, you know, its robotic teeth, and then it ends up crashing into the wall, and it has to recalibrate, and so it's kind of humorous again as its head's just spinning on the spot while the others are panicking and screaming. Yutani has been impaled in the leg, and he gives a convincing, agonizing kind of grimace. But then it's Carpenter who gets pinned into the corner as the robot has a
because
death
he's scared
bite.
to press a button, he
Right.
can't bring himself to press the button because he's a cow. He's essentially been played as a coward for the whole of this movie.
Yes, yeah.
And it plays into that trope. He finally presses the button, but then gets murdered,
Yeah.
falling down into the pit. With the
Yeah.
robot. And you're like, yay, maybe they.
Well, at least we got an on-screen death.
It's true. It's the only death you really see.
Yeah.
And his fall into the darkness.
Yeah. But then that sequence is immediately followed up with another, like, why this decision where they're like, we need a bandage, and so Yutani reaches into his pants and tears his own underwear off to tie up a bandage.
Yeah, that was weird.
What's going on?
And he makes it kind of, again, it's like some sort of Japanese battle scream.
Yeah.
Actually rips off his underwear because he's got a huge, just to be clear, he's got a tattooed rising sun across his face.
Right.
And playing into like the Japanese kind of character.
Yeah.
He sort of isn't.
But this is where the film really just, for me, just goes really downhill into its cheese fest, cringe fest that it becomes. You know, they end up removing the tracker from her arm because Brad Dourif keeps turning up on video monitors to taunt them, you know, explaining like, I'll let you out, but first you need to reinstate me and you need to interface with me on a whenever I feel like it basis. And they end up deciding they need to have a weapon of some kind to be able to fight this deathbot. And so Kale originally volunteers to go into, you know, the Hardman kind of outfit, the Cameron, you know, robot, but it ends up being Sam Raimi who's now volunteered, and he's going to be put into the machine, and they end up ejecting his consciousness into a memory chip. Oh, it's just so 90s.
It'll save your personality to disk. I can load it back anytime.
Yeah? You better make it a big disc.
But then it's so awful. Like, he has his line, I'll be back. You're like, okay, yeah, we get it. We get it.
I know, it's trying to be an homage, but it's also a Hollywood film with Hollywood actors and a budget that's still not insignificant.
But he just becomes, like, incomprehensible as he just starts yelling and screaming, and you're just like, I don't, you know, and then we just get this extended sequence where he's wandering down corridors aiming his gun, and I'm just like, man, this is feeling very Red Dwarf, you know, and that was parody, and this is trying not to be parody,
I
but
think it is, and I think they're trying to do light comedy mixed in, but it's just bad light comedy.
It's so tonally off. I
mean,
couldn't
like
get
I said,
behind
none
it.
of the actors are absolute trash. A lot of them just pass most of the film indifferent. They get dumped with some weird dialogue or weird action scenes, or like we said, the robot. You've got to act crazy in the robot suit. I'm like,
Jamie, get out of there!
Quiet!
well, sort of crazy. None of us know. Good luck.
But because he's so calm, you know, he's not panicking, the robot sees him and is like, not interested, and then wanders
yeah,
off.
it's sort of tracking heart monitors or something.
Yeah.
So I guess none of it makes much sense at this point.
Well, then Yutani gets shot by Dante, but he's not dead, you know. And then we get an almost rape sequence, but Kale manages to stab him in the hand and get away from him again.
And then he rips it out, which is kind of gory.
It's a nice gore shot, yeah.
But then he's haunted, going, my hand layer bits, and you kind of, there is an edge of pity that's meant to be evoked for this character, I think, at some points. But they don't quite understand how to write him in a way that makes you go, crap, he's just crazy. It's not, he's not in control of his facilities. No, he's just crazy. By the end, you just literally just...
Well, that's it. Like, the next 20 minutes, half an hour of this film now is just, you know, the cat and mouse game with them.
Yeah, Yutani finally gets knocked out and killed. He gets
killed.
He
ends up making a last stand, doesn't he? He's just there firing his gun. Like, they shoot this robot
with everything. He's told to run by Kale, but he refuses to listen to her. So then he gets killed. Because common sense, like, he's calling out for his friends to get to him, and then he doesn't do the same when they're like, no, you just need to keep running, buddy, because that isn't slowing down.
Right.
So, yeah, he's just firing all these bullets in a sort of macho bullet.
But then he turns around to run, and then knocks himself out, and then dies off screen.
Yeah, because off-screen deaths are the name of this film. There's no kill machine really in this. It's just a kill.
So then, you know, the Sam Raimi is malfunctioning, and so she puts his consciousness back into it, and the two of them are kind of on the run through this facility. They end up on the roof. They end up taking the express elevator to hell, going all the way down. And they did call in the cops at one point in the film, and we cut to the cop at the station, and he's just like, yeah, there's a death robot in the Chank Corporation, yeah, whatever. And then when the elevator does get to the bottom and they get the emergency brake on, that one cop turns up and then shoots Kale.
Because, of course, the guy running the comms for the local precinct in a major city would just show up and he's like, why? Why?
And then we get another corny line of dialogue where he looks up at the sky and sees the death machine falling down on him. And I think he says, "Holy donuts."
Yeah.
What?
Holy donuts!
And dies off screen.
Of course. And there's not that much gore.
There's
the
not much
robot
gore,
isn't
no.
blood splattered or gored up by the end of this. It's just the same dodgy looking silver dog.
Well, it looks the worst at this point, where we see it in a prolonged period where it's moving down the corridor and it moves like stop motion. It's so janky. It's almost laughable.
Well, the director apparently is currently, as of 2018, doing a stop motion film in his own house. I mean, let's be clear. After this and
after
pissing
the
off
League
Sean-
of Extraordinary Gentlemen,
Yeah, this director, I just don't. He did Blade. Blade was good. I'm going to
Yes.
say that flat hands down.
yeah.
In many ways, that may have set the gold standard for what became next and led us to the era of Marvel films
Yes,
and television
hell
we
yeah.
currently have. But, I think this is a bit of a rubbish film. And again, the monster itself isn't very good. I mean, you could have done some sort of live action practical effects with it, build up a big enough bulk and have people actually inside it, giving it some naturalistic movements. The problem is they decided to do stop motion mixture with modern CGI, because there's a little bit of modern CGI dashed in here and there, especially when you're in first person with the robot. It just looks terrible. I mean, and then you reflect on all the other sequences where you see the gnashing teeth, and it could just be a hand puppet.
Right.
It's just terrible. Sorry.
yeah.
I mean,
even the climax of this film is not that exciting either. Where it's chasing them back through the corporation, they're leading it straight back into the vault. And they blow it up multiple times, but of course it's impervious to explosions, impervious to bullets, and they make it all the way back in, and they catch up with Jack Dante again, and he's made another kill switch thing, but they manage to wrestle it from him, and they end up locking him in the vault with the death machine, and they seal him in the vault, and then they release the trigger, and we don't even see him die. It just the end credits just pop up on screen. You're just like, okay, the film's had enough.
it was like a 2-hour film. I mean, this is not great cinema. There's not great cinematography. There's not great script. There's not great acting. I mean, like we said, Dourif is entertaining.
Yes, hell yeah,
But
undeniably.
He isn't a good character.
Well-
There's a difference between a good actor and a good role. I mean, and he's fine at playing the sinister character, but this character has no depth or interesting personality traits, no history, no real actions that give you any insight into his being. I mean, action and reaction. It's as simple as, like, I hate to compare it to other films, I just feel dirty. Magneto is the easy example of, like, First Class, where you have him dealing with the Nazis and stuff. You don't even need him to explain who he is. He kind of gets these short, very sharp conversations with him making comments of justice and reclaiming. It's all very simple. That, admittedly, this is much easier doing the Nazis, the Jewish kind of narrative there between the two of them. But you can tell stories and vilify/humanize those villains with very simple story techniques. And it's been done throughout. I mean, this is the issue. I mean, even in, like, the Die Hard films, the villains have better breathing room. I mean, sure, they want money. That's simple, though. In the second one, he wants money and revenge. Well, sorry, the third one, he wants money and revenge for you killing his brother in the first one. Again, these motivations are simple, clean, they're explained, and they're revealed carefully as the stories progress. All there's twists and turns, or maybe he didn't care about his brother, but he was just out to kick your ass for fun and rob just dick over America because he'd been dicked over by America. Again, it's simple motivations. I only ask for simple storytelling and clean motivations
He just wanted
in
to
these
see the
sorts of
world
action.
burn,
So did Joker in
Exactly.
Dark Knight, but the Joker at least extrapolates upon it and shows that kind of he he doesn't care about anything, and he's trying to prove it to an opposite. He's got nobody to prove what he's doing to. None of the rest of the cast are cerebral at any level.
Well, he also wants to break down Kale, you know, and he at one point he mentions to her, like, you're not the innocent in this, like, you are a child murderer, you know, you accidentally or deliberately killed your own child when you left her in the sink with a blender. So it's just like, you know, I don't know whether he's justified in this. I mean, he's a psycho.
It's so, again, and that's the problem. He's too far off with the Joker. If, as an example, you know, pulling the cleanest example of a total maniac who wants the world to burn, the Joker's controlled. Everything is methodical, and he's meant to be very smart in this. And clearly, can build super robots that are totally ridiculously indestructible for no explainable reason. I mean, at least with other films where you get like characters like RoboCop or such, they'll either have weaknesses or at least like Ed 209. They're not necessarily. If they're indestructible to some extent, it'll be explained, and their weakness that you could overcome. In this case, they just have a robot that cannot be stopped except locking it up in a cupboard.
Right.
Which is just...
Or just turning off the remote.
Yeah, I mean... and it reminds me of Crystal Lake's favourite child. I mean,
right.
He's indestructible and won't stop. Okay, how do we stop him? You don't. Oh, okay.
You just leave Crystal Lake.
Yeah, just leave it alone. He will not leave Crystal Lake. He always ends up back there. Even if he dies in space, he lands back there. Again, it's punerific in a terrible sense.
Well, Jess, do you have any favourite scenes from Death Machine?
The end credits?
Fair.
It was... no, I mean... I thought that when they did a shot of the corporate skyscraper and the city, and I was like, okay, more of this would be good, because world building would have helped.
Yeah.
Giving us an idea of the world
We
they
don't
were
get
living
very
in.
many locations.
We get bugger all, and the problem is, like I said, the roadside diner at the very beginning looks totally out of place in a post-sci-fi kind of apocalypse. Everything was strangely on fire in weird and wacky ways, because again, set design was like, this is a diner, we can't damage it, so let's just put a empty can of beans there and just set fire to it. And I'm like, that's not what happens when I leave the kitchen normally. Maybe a pan. Oh, the pan's on fire too. And like,
of course,
and
everything's going to be on fire.
Everything was just smoking and randomly on fire. And again, it was just really weird set decisions. I mean, you want to be clever with where you have fire, you know, just off screen, so it feels like parts of the building are on fire.
Yeah.
You can do it in a bin, essentially. And you get that catch a flame just off the bottom of your camera angle with smoke rising across the shot. That would have worked, but instead they had really odd choices throughout. There's no blood, because again, this isn't really an 18 kind of R-rated film.
Oh, it is.
No, but it really isn't. And it was getting banned in films for reasons we're yet to fully understand. And at least maybe this might be the modern sensibilities. And as we said, for the time, the CGI was actually, and the special effects weren't bad.
Yeah.
But they don't age well. I mean, and that's maybe going to cost it, because the best films that have aged over the years are the ones that heavily rely on miniatures and carefully controlled practical effects, like the CGI sequences or rotoscoping.
Yeah.
Some sort of cleverness with camera trickery is the way that films age well. And this film just doesn't have many scenes that I mean, the elevator is probably the only sequence where you get some level of real horror. It's claustrophobic, gnashing jaws in a closed environment, and a very scared man wetting himself and not pressing a button. Again, it gets silly though, and that takes away. You need a good horror film can have comedy, and I think at times a little bit of a laugh is almost a release. We as humans have stress release functions, and black humour and such is always something that we fall back on. And I think, you know, we Brits especially love our black and dark humour. So I think when you see that in a horror film, a good horror fan appreciates it, because, you know, there's a difference between Army of Darkness to, you know,
Evil Dead.
Dead to early Evil
sure.
Dead. Again, where it becomes maybe too silly, you could argue, but I still enjoy it. And I think there's a balance that Raimi finds in those films where he weaves comedy at different, increasing levels across the three films in the trilogy. And he proves it works. And I mean, we're going to see soon with like Multiverse of Madness, when Raimi comes back to direct the next Doctor Strange movie, to see if he can weave it, shall we say, in an even more PG scenario, where he can just keep that horror humour and a little bit of suspense and eldritch or interdimensional horror, which I assume we don't know quite the script, but we're hoping for something like that. And again, that's the problem you've got in this. There's no understanding of how to weave it. Maybe, again, you could say it's his first directorial piece. The director had done special effects for, like, Aliens and stuff in the year, and lots of other films in the years prior to this. He only ever directed 4 films. One of them was Blade. The other 3 were, well, League of Gentlemen, this, and another one that I can't remember. But they were all bad to bland, bar Blade.
Sure.
He didn't write or direct. He produced Blade, though, so you could argue there were other hands in that particular pie, making sure it was correctly put together. And again, editorial-wise, it's maybe editing. And this, I don't think it's just editing with this film. This film has so many dynamic problems. But yeah, the elevator scene, sorry to get to your answer, is probably the only scene that I think is of itself any good.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. The elevator sequence was by far the best action sequence. It was well edited. We got to see the monster really for the first time. The claustrophobic feel, the performances from the actors there, it was believable. It was well shot, well lit, and probably the standout action horror part. For me, the rest of the most memorable scenes, though, was really just the comedy stuff. You know, like Jack Dante's introduction, the giant spliffs, the list of offences, and then recommend immediate promotion, the weapons removal, including the rubber chicken.
But again, you say they're the best, but it's a low bar.
Yeah.
Because they're not well-delivered sequences. And it's almost dealt too straight-faced. When Yutani's stripping him, he's doing it a little with deadpan. He makes a little bit of a quizzical look on his face at one point, but it's so off. The whole scene just feels weird.
It was shot for comedy. Like, there's no way that's not intentional.
No, I know, but it didn't deliver the punchline quite right. There's no zinger. There's no.
Well, it's the rubber chicken is the zinger. It's like, oh, it's the gag. It's the
callback. You'd already seen the rubber chicken.
Yeah.
You knew it was on his person, so there's no pun there. If there'd not been a rubber chicken revealed, this is the point with writing, pacing, and revealing comedic twists. If he'd had a different item revealed from his coat earlier in the sequence where he's in her office, I think it's when the rubber chicken's revealed. If he pulled something else out, like it's like an endless bag of strange oddities, his coat, then it would have been a kind of running gag to have different things appear out of his coat.
Sure,
but it was the same item. So the punchline wasn't really that well delivered. There's no zinging one-liner to throw in. There's no good one-liners in this whole film, except knockoff ones from other films.
Sure, yeah.
So you end up with a kind of terrible situation where a lot of these scenes fall flat, and that's the problem. It's the flat ending of an average scene needs to be finished with a zinger or some sort of cheesy one-liner in these sorts of slightly over-the-top action films, and this is a good over-the-top action film.
Well, I did like the line, we'll fax you too?
Yeah? Go fax yourself.
I mean,
no, go fax yourself. That's what it says.
Okay, that was. It was the better of low bar. Again, like I said, I don't.
Well, do you recommend?
No, not to anybody. This is bland. I mean, there's so many better films that do this better. The monster's not worth my time. The villain's not worth my time. The heroine, I feel she's left a little bit floundering because she isn't even the one in the battlesuit at the end, which I kind of was like, nah. And the end up the kind of male hero is a stoner anti-war
humanitarian
activist who ends up in a battlesuit, and none of it makes any sense. He's just a contradiction of every single sequence. All the ideas that cobble him together are just contradictions. And he staggers out at the end, having lost his friends, and there's no weeping, there's no sadness. He's kind of just like, well, that's the end of the film. Thank fuck. Take the paycheck. Goodbye. That's just like, everyone just took a paycheck on this film. I'm glad they got paid. That's, it's tough times. So.
Well, for me, this was a top quality B-movie, blending sci-fi, horror, action with plenty of comedy. And despite all that, I really had a hard time finishing
you fell asleep
this
twice.
film.
You said
I
you
did.
fell asleep
I just
twice.
said I had a hard time finishing this film. It was such a jumbled mess of bad acting, corny dialogue, lazy editing, and poor pacing. I have to say that Brad Dourif was the standout actor, and he is and has always been an absolute treat to watch. So unpredictable, creepy, and with such intensity that he was the highlight of the film, followed only by the death machine itself. The effects were fairly decent considering the budget, with impressive miniatures and some interesting design. But the death scenes were very disappointing considering the film was once banned for excessive violence. I honestly found this film more of a comedy than anything else, intentional or not, and found it hard to root for any of the characters, which is a shame, as I think that there is a cult classic hiding underneath this 2-hour runtime, and perhaps with 30 minutes cut, this could truly be a quality, entertaining cyberpunk alien ripoff. As it is, I found it average and mildly entertaining, and could only recommend this if you're a fan of Brad Dourif, or if you're looking for good, bad films. You could do far worse than this one.
Welcome.
Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.